Dust choked Dustwater's air. But inside the Caldwell house, a girl's silence screamed louder than any wind. Amos Ward guided his buckboard along scorched, parched earth to the homestead's corral, leather reins creaking in his gloved hands. Rusty, his brindled hound, nose at the gatepost, nostrils flaring in mesquite-scented dusk. Amos's shoulders bore the weight of 2 funerals, his young wife and their unborn child lost to fever last winter, yet he sought solace in steady tasks, trading flour for hides, repairing fence rails, measures that silenced grief like settled dust. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. He dismounted, spurs clicking soft as praying mantis. Ezra Caldwell's sons, Sam and Hank, 15 and 12, ammo from the barn, rifles slung carelessly. They grinned at Rusty. Amos nodded curt greeting and followed Ruth Caldwell into the dim kitchen, where a lantern glow pooled on oilcloth and worn plank floor. The table groaned under tin cups and bowls, stew of salt pork and turnips, biscuits still warm from a hearth. Ruth ladled generous portions to her brood. First Sam, then Hank, then husband Ezra, while a third chair sat empty. Amos cleared his throat. "Trade your flour for some hides, Ezra." He lifted 3 sacks from the back of the buckboard. Ezra grunted. "That, and I'll take your help fixing corral gate." He waved a meaty hand. Amos nodded and noticed, for the first time, the small figure in the corner, pale-cheeked, mousy-haired Lila Caldwell. She knelt before the hearth, sweeping ash into a tin tray, skirts swirling in soot. No adult offered her even a biscuit. Her eyes, dark as obsidian, flicked to Amos's plate then away, throat bobbing in silent hunger. Amos swallowed stew smoke and scouted the table. 2 bowls sat heaped, one empty. "Ruth," he said, voice low as creek in winter. "Why isn't she eating too?" Ruth's lips pinched. She avoided Lila's glance. "She's saving room for supper." Ruth's tone was brittle as old crockery. Amos pressed biscuit between fingertips and rose. He took a loaf from cooler shelf, golden crust dimpled with butter, and cracked a piece in 2. Amos walked to Lila's side. He crouched beside her, biscuit halves in palm. "Here." No flourish, only steady kindness. Lila froze. Ruth spat and turned away, pinning apron strings tight. Amos extended bread. The girl's small fingers trembled as they reached. She bit at crust's edge, tearful hush soft against crust. Amos waited as she pressed crumbs between her teeth. Rusty nosed Amos's boot, hopeful for a scrap. Amos patted the dog's head, then rose. "I'll see about that gate," he said to Ezra, voice gentle but firm. Outside, Amos measured posts and rails by lantern light. Rusty padded close, each breath puffing steam. He set spade and hammer aside and knelt, tracing boot prints in dust. Sam's spurs left sharp crescents. Hank's print a child's oval. No trace of Lila's fluttering skirts. Amos exhaled, then climbed back to his buckboard, rifle across lap. At dawn's brittle edge, Preacher Thomas arrived on a tired gelding. He dismounted and joined Amos at the gate. "I saw the girl last night," Thomas said, voice soft as pine needle rain. Tears and shadows, clutching something round and shining. He lifted his satchel. "I've counseled Mrs. Caldwell. She must heed God's mercy." His eyes flicked to Amos's corral. "You did well." Amos looped rein around post. "I can't leave her there." He studied the rising sun's glare on Caldwell's roof. "I'll bring her water and food myself." Thomas nodded, dusty eyes gray with shared faith. Late that afternoon, Amos fetched 2 tin pails from the buckboard. He carried one to the well, letting Rusty lap from the other. At Caldwell's back door, Lila crouched on a step, locket gleaming in her fist, silver loop inscribed "Forever Bound." Amos paused, gauging her fear. He set pail down and knelt, offering water. Lila sank to knees and drank, knees shaking in faded calico. Amos watched each swallow, remembering his own thirst in war's trenches, and the mercy of strangers who gave him water and bread. She rose and backed toward the kitchen, pail bobbing at her side. Amos called softly, "Eat your supper, too." Ruth's voice barked from inside, but Lila didn't stop. She slipped through open door. Pail heeled in a shriek, Ezra's belt biting Lila's arm. Amos sprang forward, reaching in time to grab Ezra's cuff. Ruth gasped, hands to mouth. "Let her be," Amos said, voice ringing like church bell. Ezra's mustache bristled. "Mind your business, Ward." He yanked arm free. Lila stumbled toward Amos, clutching locket, tears pooling. Amos scooped her into his arms, biscuit half still in her fist. He strode through kitchen, halting only to gather Thomas's gaze. Preachers gnawed firm as Scripture's page. Amos carried Lila out to corral. Rusty whined. Thomas trailed behind. Amos set the girl on a bale of hay. He wiped her tears with the hem of his coat. Lila pressed a locket to her lips, shivering. Amos offered the other biscuit half. She shook her head, cheeks hollow. He pressed bread to her lips. She wavered, then bit, soft crumb melting with tears. Ezra stormed the gate, belt dangling. "You have no right." Thomas stepped between them, hand on Caldwell's shoulder. "The Lord commands mercy." Caldwell's gaze flicked to Lila's silent hunger, then to Amos's gentle act. He grunted and turned away, retreating inside. "Caleb." "No." Amos exhaled, reaching for a spade. He turned to Thomas. "She'll stay until we find a better home." Thomas nodded. Rusty nosed Lila's side. She stroked the dog's head, locket cradled in the other. That midnight, Amos awakened to the sound of sobbing. He slipped from the bunkhouse and followed Rusty's soft whine to the hayloft. There, Lila sat beneath a single lantern, hairpin dangling from chain as she pressed a locket to her heart. Her small shoulders heaved in moon's borrowed light. Amos knelt behind her and draped the coat across her lap, his coat scented with saddle leather and sagebrush. Lila buried her face in wool, tears soaking thread. Amos placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. No words, only the hush of promise that in his arms she would never serve alone again. Outside, borrowed hoofprints muddled the corral gate, a hen pursuit under frostbitten ridges. In the hush before dawn's reckoning, Amos Ward held Lila Caldwell close, heart tethered to her silent plea. Why isn't she eating too? And pledged to see her fed, safe, and free, whatever the cost. Starlight carved Dustwater's hills, but Amos Ward saw only a girl's trembling hands cupping a silver locket beneath Moon's pale eye. He stood at the Caldwell gate. Preacher Thomas at his side, lantern light pooling on rough oak boards. Rusty, his brindle hound, nose at Lila's boots, flesh bruised beneath faded calico. Amos's chest tightened with the memory of his own loss. Tonight, he would not let another child fade into darkness. Thomas rapped the door. Ruth Caldwell answered, eyes narrow in lantern's glare. Amos introduced himself. "I'm here for Lila." Ruth's lips curved in practiced sweetness. "She's well." She lied. "Help yourself to supper." She bowed and swept inside. Amos exchanged a look with Thomas. He followed past oilcloth tables strewn with dishes, empty bowls stained with stew drips. He stooped to Lila's level, her eyes fixed on a single crust of cornbread. He offered his own pocket knife to peel turnips, hoping to probe truth without words. Lila tugged at her shawl, thumb grazing the locket's edge. At table's end, Amos laid out 2 tin plates, one heavy with stew and biscuits, the other nearly bare. He pushed the full plate toward Lila. Her gaze flicked from plate to locket, haunted by a mother's final gift. She took biscuit half, crumbs falling like soft rain, and fled to the shadows. Ruth's voice cut the hush. "She's saving room for chores," she crooned. Amos squared his shoulders. "Chores require strength," he said. "She should eat like any Caldwell." Ezra Caldwell entered, belt buckled gleaming brass. He snarled at Amos. "Mind your place, Ward." Amos met his glare alone. Grief and mercy girded his spine. Ezra's scowl deepened, Lila drew back. That night on his porch, Amos thumbed the locket's chain and recalled his wife's lullabies. Rusty settled at his feet, muzzle resting on calloused boots. Thomas joined him, lantern swinging. "She's afraid," Thomas said. "Your kindness is a beacon." Amos nodded. "I'll keep it lit until she's safe." By dawn, Amos rode to Sarah McAllister's cabin, widow known for her quick wit and softer heart. Sarah stood among drying quilts, hands mending ragged seams. Amos dismounted and touched spurred boot to porch. "Sarah," he said, "I need help for Lila." She frowned, nodding. "I've heard the Caldwells beat her when no one's looking." She produced a shawl, wool heavy with warmth, for Lila's shoulders. "Give her this," Sarah said, "and promise she'll have meals under my roof if you need a refuge." Amos pressed a hand to his chest. "I vow to protect her." Sarah's eyes glistened. "Then bring her here, and we'll show her kindness by the plateful." Back at the Caldwell homestead, Amos tethered his horse and carried the shawl. He found Lila in the barn, feeding Rusty from a tin cup. Her small shoulders shivered beneath light. Amos knelt, draping Sarah's wool across Lila's back. The warmth bloomed between them, truss stitched in quilt's weave. Lila sniffed and pressed a locket to the shawl's wool. Amos laid a biscuit in her small palm. She bit and closed her eyes. Ezra's thunderous voice split the barn's hush. "What's this?" Amos rose, offering his broad chest. "She deserves warmth and food," he said. Ezra's fist shot out. Lila cried and retreated behind Amos. Thomas stepped in, hand on Ezra's shoulder. "Let the boy feed her," he commanded. Ezra snarled, then spat in dust and stalked away. That night, Amos and Thomas shared coffee by lantern glow. Amos cradled the locket, chain tangled in fingers. "She won't speak," Amos said, "but her actions, hiding food, seeking kindness, tell me she's ready to trust." Thomas nodded. "And we will not fail her." Amos exhaled and closed his eyes to memory's ache. His child's cradle empty, his vow to protect now reborn. Rusty's whine drew Amos to the barn door. He stepped outside into mesquite-scented dusk. Moonlight revealed footprints, cold spurred boots, trailing toward the ranch house. Amos's jaw clenched. He lifted his Colt from saddle scabbard, finger brushing hammer's curve. Thomas joined, Bible in hand. No words, only prayer's gravity. Amos rode at pace, Rusty bounding at horse's flank. He reached the road, Colt ready, lantern bobbing behind. Ahead, Cole lingered beneath cottonwoods, knife glinting in midnight's hush. Amos reined in and met Cole's dark eyes. "What do you want?" Amos's voice was low as canyon rock. Cole's grin was cruel as barbed wire. "Ezra said you're meddling," he sneered. He twirled the knife's bone hilt. "Keep your dog quiet, or this girl runs silent forever." Rusty growled, hackles raised. Amos cocked the Colt. "If you harm her, I'll see justice served." Cole's lips twitched. "I'll see you 6 feet under instead." He vanished into Mesquite's shadow, knife glinting once more before disappearing. Amos exhaled and patted Rusty's flank. He reined back toward Caldwell homestead, heart pounding as cold as steel. The night held its breath. Dawn would bring their vow to protect or betray it in blood stain. In the moon's borrowed light, Amos Ward's Colt gleamed, ready to defend a silent servant, and Cole's blade glinted promise of danger yet to come. Wind howled through Dustwater's mesquite, but Amos Ward heard only Lila's unspoken plea, each tremor a small hand pressed against his coat. He and preacher Thomas dismounted at the Caldwell gate. Sarah McAllister and rancher Eli Davis, bearded, broad-shouldered at their heels. Rusty nosed Lila's callous boots. She clutched the silver locket, forever bound, against a bruised pink wrist. Amos's chest tightened with the memory of his own mournful vows. They entered the kitchen. Oilcloth rustled beneath their boots. Ruth Caldwell hovered by the hearth, biscuit pan in hand. Amos laid a sheriff's report on the table, ink glinting in lantern light. "She bears fresh bruises," Amos said, voice low. and neglect's weight. Thomas nodded, Bible held like shield. Sarah folded her arms. Eli's fingers tapped spurred boot. Ruth's eyes darted to Lila. She's clumsy, she lied. Scuffed herself fetching water. Amos's gaze flicked to Lila's tearing eyes. He beckoned the girl forward. Lila trembled, then opened the locket. Inside lay a worn scrap of vellum. Her mother's scrawl, "Never leave me hungry." Lila pressed thumb to script. Promise broken by Caldwell's neglect and Ezra's cold glare. Ezra Caldwell entered, coat tails sweeping dust. He glared at the report. "What's this?" he spat. Amos folded his arms. "Lila's safety," he said, "and her right to proper care." Ezra sneered. "She's my child. I decide." Eli stepped forward. "And I'm offering manpower if you can't handle chores," he said. "You hire gunslingers instead of farmhands." Tension crackled like pistol spark. Thomas's hand drifted to his Bible. "The Lord commands mercy," he intoned. Ezra's jaw clenched. Ruth crossed her arms, eyes stubborn as bramble. Lila pressed locket to her chest, defiance shaping her small frame. Amos met Ezra's glare. Two widowers bound by grief's shrapnel, but only one driven by cruelty's greed. That night, Amos sat by lantern glow in his bunkhouse, drafting the sheriff's report on his journal. Rusty lay at his feet, head on paws. Sarah fetched a cup of coffee and handed it to Amos. He sipped bitter warmth. Every page he wrote was another step toward rescue. Eli knocked and entered, Winchester over shoulder. "I've men ready to reinforce," Eli said. Amos nodded, grateful for the rancher's silent vow. Outside, Lila slipped from shadows, parchment clenched in small fist. She pressed her back to the wall and watched Amos by lamplight. When Sarah's door closed, Lila crept forward and pressed a note into Amos's palm. No words, only the tremor of paper and a heartbeat's plea. Amos unfolded the scrap. "They plan tonight. Tate waits at your barn." Lila's eyes glistened in moonlight. Amos braced her hand against his chest. Trust woven in silence. At the barn, Amos and Eli stoked embers beneath overturned saddle rack, echoing lantern's uncertain glow. Mass-on beams bore wind's hiss. Amos adjusted the padlock on the feed chest. Eli tightened nails on the door's brace. Rusty prowled inside, nose low. Lila watched from the loft's edge, hairpin looped on chain, a mother's mercy glinting in dust. Suddenly, Eli's head snapped toward barn's open door. A figure crouched in moonlit drift. Cole's shadow, knife blade gleaming. Cole lunged, ashen moon, and Steele's promise. Amos fired a warning shot. Bank shot shattered water barrel. Splinters and droplets rose like startled birds. Cole jerked back, knife hissing in moonlight, then vanished into Sage's embrace. Amos exhaled, fist tight on the Colt's grip. Lila's breath caught in the rafters. She pressed hairpin into her palm as if drawing strength from Kappa's coil. Rusty padded to her side. She stroked brindled fur. Amos climbed ladder and swept her into his arms. Her small arms clutched the locket and his coat. No words, only the hush of refuge. At dawn's pale edge, Tate's hoofbeats thundered toward Homestead. Amos, Sarah, and Eli stood behind the corral fence, Winchesters and rifles cradled. Lila pressed hairpin to her lips, eyes bright as oilcloth gleam. Rusty circled at her heels. Sarah held lantern high as signal. Eli nodded at Amos. "Stand firm." Tate emerged in spurs and leather, rifle slung, torch swaying in one hand. He placed a torch to Barnes' corner. Flames caught kindling's edge in hungry lick. Smoke curled like grief born in fire. Amos raised his hand. "Stop," he called, voice echoing across frostbitten corral. Tate paused, torch's ember reflecting in his eyes like cruel stars. In the hush before fire's full rage, Tate's torch poised at the barn's edge, and only Amos Ward's vow, Rusty's loyalty, and Lila's silent courage could stand between home and heartbreak as the gathering storm unleashed its flame. Flames licked Amos's barn, but Lila's courage burned brighter in the rafters. Smoke curled like broken vows beneath the red-gold dusk. Amos Ward raced across frostbitten corral, tin pails in each hand. Sarah McAllister and Eli Davis met him at the gate, rifles slung at ready. Rusty, the brindled hound, circled Lila's hiding place. Hayloft shadows where she knelt, locket clutched close like a mother's heartbeat. Amos passed pail to Sarah. She heaved mended quilt over beams and doused sparks with flannel's weight. Eli pressed lantern light to stack boards, guiding Amos's aim as he poured water over kindling's embers. Preacher Thomas arrived, Bible in one hand, bucket in the other, and joined the circle of mercy against flame's hunger. Each splash echoed through cedar planks. Turning fires roared at his surrender. Lila slipped from Hay's cradle, knees scraping straw. Rusty nudged her forward. She pressed the quilt's edge to her cheek, warmth woven in compassion's thread. Amos beckoned, voice soft as soot. "You're safe now." Lila's fingers trembled on the locket's chain. Forever bound, and she pressed the silver loop to Rusty's head, as if drawing strength from his fur. By lantern's glow, Sheriff Mallory rode in on a gray mare stamped with sweat. He surveyed scorched beams and flickering lanterns. Amos greeted him with steady calm. "Thank you for coming." He led the sheriff to the barn's threshold, where smoke-etched walls bore splinters and scorch. Sheriff frowned. "Looks arson." He crouched beside Lila, who stepped into light. He tipped his hat, revealing bruises, purple bloom beneath skin. Amos exhaled. "She's been hurt worse." Thomas produced a vellum note from Lila's locket. Ragged script in her mother's hand. "Never leave me hungry." The sheriff read, brow furrowed. "This speaks of neglect, criminal neglect." He laid hat on his knee. "I'll file charges at dawn." Lila nodded, eyes bright with relief and sorrow. She pressed a note to her lips, then tucked it back into silver sanctuary. Amos stood behind her, hand on her shoulder, their vow etched in dust and flame. Night deepened in hush as allies tended wounds. Sarah mixed ginger sage salve in tin bowl, coating Lila's bruised arm with gentle strokes. Lila pressed cheek to Sal's warmth, eyes fluttering shut. Amos watched, each breath a prayer for healing. Eli repaired Barnes' broken latch, each hammer strike a vow to guard this home. Rusty nosed at Amos's boot. Amos reached down and looped the dog's collar in his fist. Promise of watchfulness born of loyalty's pact. Outside, the wind rattled loose shingles. Moonlight glimmered on mesquite skeletal silhouettes. Suddenly, Cole's bark cracked night's veil. Cole's return. Amos sprang behind a stacked saddle. Eli yanked Lila and Sarah behind fence rails. Thomas lifted his Bible, spine gleaming like hope's banner. Cole and Tate, knife and Winchester glinting, strode into corral's ring, intent in each spurred step. Amos leveled his Colt. "Hold fast," he murmured. Sarah's eyes met his. Silent vow to stand by his side. Cole lunged for Sarah. She sidestepped, rifle but cracking lamppost. Tate fired. Eli's Winchester answered with thunder's echo. Bullets bore into corral rails, splintering cedar like dying birds. Lila hove behind haystack, Rusty at her side, muzzle raised in challenge. She pressed locket to her heart. Each loop of silver a mother's ward against violence. Amos pressed forward. Colt aimed at Cole's chest. Cole crumpled under non-lethal shot. He collapsed in dust's hush. Tate fared no better. Eli's rifle barked again, knocking Tate's rifle from grasp. The posse faltered, Cole and Tate bleeding, fists raised in surrender. Lila emerged from shadows, bootstraps clicking on straw. She crossed to Amos and pressed the locket into his hand. Trust sealed in Kappa's kinship. Amos closed his palm over silver, linking their destinies. He motioned Sheriff Mallory, who emerged from Barnes' gloom, cuffs in hand. Cole and Tate were bound, eyes dull beneath spurs jangle. Sarah exhaled and draped her shawl across Lila's shoulders. Quilt of kindness woven in grief's aftermath. Lila's head rested on the soft folds as lantern light danced in quilt's patchwork. Amos watched the scene, chest loosening with each captured gunslinger's jingle. At dawn's pale edge, Sheriff Mallory returned with formal court summons. He handed it to Amos, parchment edged in official seal. Ezra Caldwell demands Lila's return, the sheriff said. Amos's gaze flicked to the summons, then to Lila pressed Sarah aside. He folded the paper with deliberate calm. Then we meet him there, he said, voice low as canyon floor. Sarah nodded. Eli's spurs clicked in solidarity. Lila looked up, eyes bright with dawn's promise and fear's echo. She pressed her small fist to her chest, locket looped between fingers. Rusty nosed her hand. She stroked brindled fur, finding courage in loyalty's warmth. Amos walked the perimeter of his battered barn, lantern in hand. He studied scorched beams and splintered rails, each scar a testament to their stand for freedom. He knelt and traced knife gouges in plank. Ezra's threat carved in wood. He exhaled and pressed locket into the notch, silver bright against cedar's grain. The locket gleamed like hope's anthem against the wood's bruise. He rose and faced the rising sun, court's verdict looming like Ridge's final proof. Allies gathered behind him. Thomas with Bible, Sarah with quilt, Eli with Winchester. Rusty at Amos's heel, muzzle raised as sentinel. Lila stood before them, resolute as prairie grass. In dawn's fragile hush, Amos Ward held the Caldwell summons like a gauntlet, blood-bound in law script, and only courage carved from loss could carry them to Part 5's Dawn of Family. Dawn broke over Dustwater, but Amos Ward faced a courthouse where Lila's freedom hung in starlight's balance. Mesquite shadows stretched across sun-bleached steps. Amos, spurs clicking on stone, led Lila by the hand. Her feet slipped in soft leather boots, Rusty at her heels. Preacher Thomas and widow Sarah followed. Eli Davis bringing up the rear with Winchester at rest. Inside, oak benches held townsfolk murmuring beneath oilcloth banners, lantern-like gilding carved pews. Judge Caldwell, no relation to Ezra, settled behind his bench, robes sweeping oak. His gavel lay like a promise. Amos laid the sheriff's report before him. Bruises traced in ink, the vellum from Lila's locket, her mother's dying words, "Never leave me hungry." Sarah presented blankets and quilts, showing neglect's scars. Thomas offered Scripture's promise. Eli placed a Winchester on the bench, testimony to their stand. Lila hovered beside Amos, locket looped around her fingers, each breath forging courage between hearth and dawn. Ezra Caldwell rose, belt buckled gleaming brass. His eyes flicked from each piece of evidence to Lila's pale face. "She's mine," he snarled. "I raised her." The judge's gaze held him in silence. Lila stepped forward, hair brushing Amos's coat. She lifted the locket and unfolded the vellum. "Ma wanted me fed," she whispered, voice cracked as parched earth. "She died, so I would never be left hungry." Her hand trembled, but steel glowed beneath her sorrow. Amos covered her hand with his. No words, only solidarity's pulse. Judge Caldwell pounded gavel. "This court finds Lila Caldwell a ward of Amos Ward. Ezra Caldwell is remanded for neglect and threats. Guardianship is granted." He stamped the ruling, the sound echoing like cannon's roar across the hush. Ezra's face drained. He sank on the bench as deputies advanced. Cole and Tate, absent from trial, had fled Dustwater's rising sun, leaving threats to vanish like dew on mesquite leaves. Lila exhaled, head resting on Amos's arm. Rusty nuzzled her hand. She stroked brindled fur. Amos's chest eased. Promise kept, sorrow tempered by dawn's mercy. Outside, horses stamped beneath saddle scabbards. Townsfolk lined the steps in quiet applause. Sarah draped her shawl across Lila's shoulders, warmth woven in widow's grace. Eli tipped his hat and offered his arm to Amos. Thomas blessed Lila with words soft as pine needle rain. Rusty barked, echoing joy in shallow barrels. Amos lifted Lila and descended the steps, guardianship seal heavier than any lead. Lila's small arm circled his neck, trust drawn in child's clasp. Amos pressed his cheek to hers. No words, only home's breath and sheer heartbeat. Back at the ranch, Cradled by frostbitten corral and repaired gate, Lila ran her fingers through freshly tilled soil. Amos knelt beside her, spade in hand. Together, they planted seeds of wildflower and corn, a garden's pledge of healing. Each seed pressed into earth, memory forged into soil's heart. Rusty-nosed each seedling, tail wagging in sunrise's glow. Sarah and Thomas tended young shoots in the cellar greenhouse. Sarah pressed flannel blankets over seedlings, whispering blessings. Eli drove nails on a rebuilt barn door, each strike a vow to guard this home. Amos watched them, chest eased like a breeze through mesquite. That evening, Amos built a shelf above the hearth, cedar beams smoothed by sandpaper's hum. He placed Lila's silver locket on the mantel, forever bound, glinting in lamp's glow. He stepped back and allowed her to hang her mother's vellum beside it. Edges curled by time, ink preserved in love's final stroke. Lila turned to Amos, eyes bright as captured stars, and he swept her into his arms. No words, only shelter's promise in cedar and silver. Weeks passed in steady grace. Amos and Eli mended fence rails between coffee-scented mornings. Sarah taught Lila to knead bread and bake biscuits. Thomas led evening prayers beneath oilcloth tent, each voice weaving hopesome. Rusty rested at the hearth, head on paws, vigilant as any sentinel. One golden dawn, Lila led Amos to corral gate. She carried a finished quilt, patchwork of calico and wool, stitches sewn by Sarah's hands and Lila's small fingers. She draped it over Amos's shoulders, blanket and bond in each fold. Amos placed his hand over his heart and bowed his head, tear-bright in sunrise's glow. That night, under red gold ridges, Amos and Lila stood on the porch. He held her close, quilt draped around both, eyes reflecting fireflies' flicker. Rusty lay at their feet, muzzle resting on Lila's boot. A single lamp glowed in the bunkhouse window, beacon against night's hush. Amos reached into his vest and drew a small tin cup. He had ground sage and peppermint for tea, memories steeped in Sal's warmth. He offered the cup to Lila. She sipped and smiled, the first full smile Amos had seen in months. He joined her in sip, eyes drifting to the locket on the mantel, promise sealed in silver loop and cedar beam. In Dustwater's heart, a new family took root. Chosen connections forged in mercy's fire, redemption grown in love's careful fields. Lila pressed her cheek to Amos's coat, home's fragrance in saddle leather and cedar smoke. Amos stroked her hair, each strand a tether saving them both from grief's quicksand. Sunlight wove through mesquite like hope's thread. Rusty's eyes softened the night's edge. On the horizon, spurs glinted on ridgelines. Townsfolk's respect riding at dawn. Amos drew in the morning air, lungs filled with second chances. Together, Amos Ward and Lila Caldwell faced tomorrow's promise. A dawn family, forever bound by bread and quilt, spade and locket, love and mercy, an unbreakable bond fashioned beneath Dustwater's vast sky, one sunrise at a time.